When the storm came, the rain hammered against the windows of Marcus Chen's modest two-bedroom home like an angry fist, each drop carrying the weight of a sky that had been holding its breath for weeks. Lightning split the darkness outside, illuminating the figure hunched beneath his small front porch, a woman clutching a young boy to her chest, both of them soaked to the bone and shivering in the October cold. Marcus had been nursing his third cup of coffee when he first noticed them through his kitchen window. The storm had been brewing all evening, meteorologists warning of flash floods and dangerous winds, but he hadn't expected to see anyone out in weather like this. Especially not a mother and child with nowhere else to go. He set down his mug and moved closer to the window, his heart sinking as he watched the woman try to shield the boy from the worst of the rain. She couldn't have been more than 30, with dark hair plastered to her face and clothes that had seen better days. The child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, pressed closer to her side, his small frame trembling. Marcus knew that look. He'd worn it himself once, 15 years ago, when his own world had crumbled and left him standing in someone else's rain. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and opened the front door, stepping into the storm. The wind nearly knocked him backward, but he pressed forward, raising his voice above the thunder. "Hey," he called out. "You can't stay out here." The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes were wide with fear and exhaustion, the kind that came from running on empty for too long. She pulled the boy closer, instinctively protective. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible over the storm. We'll move along. "I'm sorry." "No, wait." Marcus held up his hands, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to come inside. This storm's going to get worse before it gets better." The woman hesitated, and Marcus could see the internal battle playing out across her face. Trust versus survival. Hope versus experience. He'd been there too. "My name's Marcus," he said, taking a small step closer. "I live alone, and I've got a couch, hot coffee, and a dry place to wait out this storm. No strings attached. I can't leave you out here." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud it felt like the sky was splitting open. The boy whimpered and buried his face against his mother's shoulder. "Please," Marcus added softly. "Let me help." The woman's resolve cracked like ice under pressure. She nodded once, quick and uncertain, and Marcus gestured for them to follow him inside. The warmth of the house hit them like a wave as they crossed the threshold. Marcus quickly closed the door behind them, shutting out the storm's fury. In the soft yellow light of his living room, he could see them more clearly now. The woman's pale face marked by exhaustion and worry, the boy's wide brown eyes taking in everything with the wariness of someone much older than his years. "I'm Elena," the woman said quietly, her voice still shaking from the cold. "And this is my son, Jamie." "Nice to meet you both," Marcus replied, his tone gentle. "Let me get you some towels and something warm to drink." As he moved through his small home gathering supplies, Marcus couldn't help but notice the way Elena stayed close to the door, ready to bolt at the first sign of trouble. Jamie hadn't spoken a word yet, but his eyes followed Marcus's every movement with an intensity that made Marcus's chest tighten. He returned with thick towels, a change of clothes that might fit Elena, and one of his smaller sweatshirts for Jamie. "The bathroom's just down the hall if you want to get out of those wet clothes," he offered. "I'll put on some soup and coffee." Elena accepted the towels gratefully but shook her head at the clothes. "We don't want to impose. We'll just dry off and wait for the storm to pass." "You're not imposing," Marcus said firmly. "And this storm's supposed to last all night. At least let the boy get warm." As if on cue, Jamie sneezed, a small sound that seemed to echo in the quiet house. Elena's resolve wavered again, and she gently guided her son toward the bathroom. While they were gone, Marcus busied himself in the kitchen, heating up a can of tomato soup and starting a fresh pot of coffee. The routine tasks helped calm his nerves, though he couldn't shake the feeling that these two had been through more than just one bad storm. Elena emerged from the bathroom first, still in her own damp clothes but with her hair towel dried and some color returned to her cheeks. Jamie followed, swimming in Marcus's sweatshirt, his own clothes bundled in his arms. "Thank you," Elena said, settling onto the edge of the couch as if she might need to leave at any moment. "This is very kind of you." Marcus brought them steaming mugs of soup and coffee, noting how Elena tested the temperature of Jamie's soup before letting him drink, how she kept one protective hand on his shoulder at all times. These were the movements of someone who had learned to be careful, to expect the worst. How long have you been out there? Marcus asked gently, settling into his armchair across from them. Elena's grip tightened on her coffee mug. Just today. We were trying to get to the shelter downtown, but the buses stopped running when the storm hit. We thought we could walk, but... She didn't finish the sentence, but Marcus could fill in the blanks. The shelter was 8 miles away, through parts of the city that weren't safe even in good weather. In a storm like this, it would have been impossible. Are you from around here? He asked. Elena shook her head. We came up from Phoenix about a week ago. I got a job offer, or thought I did. Turned out to be one of those scams. By the time I figured it out, we'd already spent what little money we had on the bus tickets. The story tumbled out slowly, piece by piece. Elena had been a nurse in Phoenix until the hospital where she worked went through massive layoffs. She'd struggled to find another position, burning through her savings while trying to keep their small apartment. When the eviction notice came, she'd seen the job posting that seemed too good to be true, and had been desperate enough to believe it anyway. I should have known better, she said, her voice thick with self-recrimination. I should have verified it, should have had a backup plan. I put us in this situation. You were trying to take care of your son, Marcus said quietly. That's what good parents do. They take risks for their kids. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. Jamie, who had been quietly eating his soup, reached over and took his mother's hand. The gesture was so natural, so protective despite his young age, that Marcus felt his own eyes burn. What about you? Elena asked, clearly trying to change the subject. Do you have family? Marcus shook his head. It's just me these days. My wife died 3 years ago, cancer. We never had kids. The words came easier now than they used to, though they still carried weight. Sarah always said this house was too big for just 2 people. Guess she'd get a kick out of knowing I'm finally putting the space to good use. The mention of his wife hung in the air for a moment, comfortable and sad at the same time. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the world, but inside Marcus's small living room, something warmer was taking shape. I'm sorry for your loss, Elena said softly. Thank you. She would have liked you too. She had a soft spot for people down on their luck. Always bringing home strays, people and animals both. Marcus smiled at the memory. Our first Christmas together, she invited 6 people she'd met at the grocery store who had nowhere else to go. I thought she'd lost her mind. Sounds like she had a good heart, Elena observed. The best. She used to say that kindness was the only thing that multiplied when you gave it away. Marcus looked at Jamie, who was listening intently despite his young age. She was a teacher, you know. 3rd grade. Kids about your age, Jamie. Jamie looked up at the mention of his name, offering the first small smile Marcus had seen from him. I like school, he said quietly. Well, I liked my old school. What was your favorite subject? Marcus asked. Science. We were learning about weather and storms and stuff. Mrs. Rodriguez said lightning is like nature's way of balancing electricity in the atmosphere. Jamie's voice grew stronger as he talked, the shy child momentarily replaced by an eager student. That's exactly right, Marcus said, impressed. Did you know that lightning is actually hotter than the surface of the sun? Jamie's eyes widened. Really? Really? About 5 times hotter. It's just that it doesn't last very long, so it can't hurt the sun or anything like that. As the evening wore on, the conversation flowed more naturally. Elena shared stories about Jamie's accomplishments, how he'd won a reading contest at his old school, how he could already multiply double-digit numbers in his head, how he'd taught himself to cook scrambled eggs when Elena had been working double shifts at the hospital. Marcus found himself sharing too, stories about Sarah, about the students she'd taught, about the small acts of kindness that had shaped their life together. He told them about the time Sarah had convinced him to foster a pregnant stray cat, how they'd ended up keeping not just the mother but 2 of the kittens as well. Where are the cats now? Jamie asked, looking around hopefully. They passed away a couple years ago, Marcus said gently. But they had good, long lives. Middens lived to be 17, which is pretty old for a cat. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse, the wind howling like something alive and angry. Elena glanced toward the window nervously. The weather service said it might last until morning, Marcus said, following her gaze. You're welcome to stay here tonight. I've got a guest room, well, it's more of an office with a futon, but it's comfortable. And Jamie could take the couch if he doesn't mind. Alina's first instinct was clearly to refuse. Marcus could see her struggling with pride and practicality, the same battle he'd fought years ago when his own world had fallen apart. I don't want to be a burden, she said finally. You're not, Marcus replied firmly. If I'm being honest, it's been nice having people in the house again. It gets pretty quiet around here. That was the truth, though not the whole truth. The silence in his house had become a living thing over the past 3 years, growing heavier with each passing month. Sarah's absence echoed in every room, in every routine he'd modified for one instead of two. Having Elena and Jamie here, hearing their voices and their stories, had awakened something in him that he'd thought was gone forever. Elena looked at Jamie, who was struggling to keep his eyes open despite his obvious fascination with the storm outside. The decision made itself. Just for tonight, she said. We'll leave first thing in the morning. Marcus showed them to the guest room, apologizing for the stacks of books and papers that turned it more into a library than a bedroom. But Elena just smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. I love books, she said, running her fingers along the spines. I used to read to Jamie every night before things got complicated. Feel free to borrow any of them, Marcus offered. Sarah was the reader in our family. She always said books were like friends you could visit whenever you needed comfort. Later, after Elena and Jamie had settled in for the night, Marcus sat alone in his living room listening to the storm. But for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel oppressive. There were other people breathing in his house, other hearts beating in rooms that had been empty for too long. He found himself thinking about the chain of events that had brought them all together. If Elena hadn't taken that risk, hadn't believed in a job opportunity that turned out to be false, she and Jamie would still be in Phoenix. If the storm hadn't hit when it did, they might have made it to the downtown shelter. If Marcus hadn't been looking out his window at just the right moment. But that was the thing about kindness, he realized. It didn't require perfect circumstances or cosmic alignment. It just required someone willing to open their door when the storm was raging outside. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the previous night's fury had been nothing more than a bad dream. Marcus woke early and started breakfast, the familiar routine of cooking for more than one person feeling both foreign and completely natural. Elena appeared in the kitchen doorway as he was flipping pancakes, Jamie still sleepy-eyed beside her. You didn't have to do all this, she said, but Marcus could hear the gratitude in her voice. I wanted to, he replied simply. Besides, these are Sarah's famous chocolate chip pancakes. She always said they could cure anything from heartbreak to homesickness. They ate together at his small kitchen table, Jamie chattering excitedly about the storm and asking Marcus endless questions about lightning and thunder and why the power had flickered but never gone out. Elena was quieter, but Marcus could see her watching her son's animated face with a mixture of love and worry. After breakfast, Marcus drove them to the downtown shelter as promised. But as they pulled up to the gray concrete building with its small sign and barred windows, he felt his stomach clench. Elena's face had gone pale again, and Jamie had stopped talking entirely. This is it, Elena said with forced brightness. Thank you so much for everything, Marcus. Really. You saved us last night. But as they climbed out of the car, Marcus found himself getting out too. Something about this felt wrong, felt incomplete. He looked at the shelter, then at Elena and Jamie standing beside his car with their few possessions, and made a decision that surprised even him. Wait, he said. What if you didn't have to stay here? Elena turned back, confused. What do you mean? Marcus took a deep breath. I mean, what if you stayed with me? Just temporarily, until you get back on your feet. I've got the space, and Jamie could start school here. There's a good elementary school just 6 blocks away. The offer hung in the air between them like morning mist. Elena stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. Marcus, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking, he interrupted gently. I'm offering. Look, I know how this sounds. I know you don't really know me, and you have every right to be suspicious. But I also know what it's like to have your life fall apart and feel like you're drowning while everyone else just walks by. He paused, gathering his thoughts. 15 years ago, I was laid off from a job I'd had for 8 years. Sarah and I had just bought our house, we had a car payment, medical bills from her father's cancer treatment. We lost everything, the house, the car, ended up living in my sister's basement for 6 months. Alina's expression softened as she listened. There was this couple, Marcus continued, the Johnsons. They lived next door to my sister. Mrs. Johnson would bring us dinner every Tuesday, just showed up with casseroles and wouldn't take no for an answer. Mr. Johnson helped me fix up my resume, made some calls to people he knew in the industry. They didn't do it because they had to. They did it because they could. He looked at Jamie, who was watching him with those serious brown eyes. I never got the chance to pay them back properly. Mr. Johnson died of a heart attack 2 years later, and Mrs. Johnson moved to Florida to be near her daughter. But I always promised myself that if I ever had the chance to be the Johnsons for someone else, I would. Elena was quiet for a long moment, her hand resting on Jamie's shoulder. Finally, she spoke. Why would you do this for strangers? Marcus smiled sadly. Because 15 years ago, the Johnsons did it for us. Because my wife taught me that kindness is the only thing that multiplies when you share it. And because, he paused, the next words harder to say. Because this house has been too quiet for too long. The truth of it hit him as he spoke. He'd been existing rather than living for the past 3 years, going through the motions of his days like an actor playing a role he didn't understand. Sarah's death had left him hollowed out, going through the mechanical routines of work and sleep and solitary meals without any real purpose. But last night, listening to Elena read to Jamie from one of Sarah's old books, watching the boy's face light up at Marcus's stories about lightning and weather, he'd felt something stir to life again. A sense of purpose, of connection, of being needed. I can't pay you rent, Elena said quietly. Not right away. I'll need to find work first, and that could take time. I'm not asking for rent, Marcus replied. I'm asking for company. I'm asking for someone to cook breakfast for again, someone to worry about when they're late coming home, someone to share stories with at the end of the day. Elena looked down at Jamie, who was tugging gently on her sleeve. Mom, he whispered, he has really good pancakes. Despite everything, Elena laughed, a sound like silver bells after the storm. He does have really good pancakes, she agreed. So? Marcus asked hopefully. Elena took a deep breath. Just temporarily, she said. Until I can find work and save up enough for our own place. Temporarily, Marcus agreed, though something in his heart hoped it might be longer. The first few days were an adjustment for all of them. Elena was clearly uncomfortable accepting help, insisting on doing most of the cooking and cleaning despite Marcus's protests. She spent her days job hunting, walking to the library to use the computer since she didn't have a phone with reliable internet, printing out resumes and applications with the determination of someone who refused to give up. Jamie, meanwhile, seemed to adapt with the resilience that children possessed in abundance. Marcus enrolled him in the local elementary school, and within a week he was coming home with stories about his new teacher, Mrs. Patterson, and a friend named Carlos who shared his love of science. Did you know, Jamie said one evening over dinner, that some lightning can be red or blue instead of white. Mrs. Patterson showed us pictures. I didn't know that, Marcus replied, genuinely interested. What causes the different colors? Different gases in the atmosphere, Jamie explained proudly. Blue lightning happens when there's lots of nitrogen, and red lightning happens higher up where there's less oxygen. Elena watched their exchange with something that looked like wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe her son was talking about lightning colors instead of worrying about where they'd sleep that night. Marcus found himself looking forward to these dinner conversations more than he'd anticipated. Jamie's questions about everything from why leaves changed color to how airplanes stayed in the sky reminded him of Sarah's students, of the curiosity and enthusiasm she'd brought home with her every day. You're good with him, Elena said one night after Jamie had gone to bed. They were sitting in the living room, Elena reading one of Sarah's old novels while Marcus graded papers from his part-time job teaching community college math classes. The domestic scene felt both comfortable and fragile, like something that might disappear if they acknowledged it too directly. He's a good kid, Marcus replied. Smart, curious. Sarah would have loved him. Tell me about her, Elena said softly. Sarah. If you don't mind. Marcus set down his papers and leaned back in his chair. She was light, he said finally. That's the best way I can describe her. She had this way of making everything seem possible, even when the world felt impossible. When I lost my job all those years ago, I was ready to give up, to declare bankruptcy and just accept that we'd failed. But Sarah wouldn't let me. She kept saying, "This is just a chapter, Marcus. It's not the whole story." He smiled at the memory. She was right, of course. I ended up getting a better job than the one I'd lost, and we were able to keep the house. But more than that, going through that hard time together made us stronger. Made us more grateful for what we had. She sounds wonderful, Elena said. She was. And stubborn as hell. Marcus laughed softly. When she got sick, the doctors told us she had maybe 6 months. She lived for 2 years, mostly because she was too stubborn to die on their timeline. She said she wasn't finished loving me yet. Elena was quiet for a moment. How do you keep going? After losing someone like that? The question carried weight beyond curiosity. Marcus could hear the exhaustion in Elena's voice, the bone-deep weariness of someone who had been fighting for too long. Some days I don't know, he admitted. For the first year after she died, I felt like I was just going through the motions. Work, home, sleep, repeat. I kept thinking about what she'd want me to do, how she'd want me to live, but I couldn't figure out how to do it without her. He paused, considering his next words carefully. But then I realized that maybe the point wasn't to figure out how to live without her. Maybe the point was to figure out how to live in a way that honored what she taught me. She believed in helping people, in opening our home to anyone who needed it. Having you and Jamie here, it feels like I'm finally doing something she'd be proud of. Elena wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. I don't usually, it's just been so hard, trying to keep it together for Jamie. Trying to pretend like I know what I'm doing. None of us know what we're doing, Marcus said gently. We're all just making it up as we go along, hoping we don't mess up too badly. Over the following weeks, their temporary arrangement began to feel less temporary and more like family. Elena found work at a local clinic, starting as a receptionist but with the promise of moving into nursing once her credentials transferred. Jamie flourished at his new school, bringing home artwork and stories and new questions that kept Marcus on his toes. Marcus found himself changing too. He started cooking again, really cooking, not just heating up frozen dinners. He began looking forward to the sound of Elena's key in the lock when she came home from work, to Jamie's excited recounting of his school day, to the three of them working together on homework at the kitchen table. But underneath the growing comfort, Marcus could sense Elena's restlessness. She was saving every penny she could, looking at apartment listings online, making plans for the day when she and Jamie would move out on their own. And while Marcus respected her independence, the thought of the house returning to its former silence filled him with dread. The turning point came on a Thursday in late November. Elena had been working at the clinic for 3 weeks, and Jamie had just finished his first successful science project at his new school, a volcano that had actually erupted in spectacular fashion, covering half the kitchen in baking soda lava. They were cleaning up the mess together, all three of them laughing at the absurdity of it, when Elena suddenly went quiet. Marcus looked over to find her staring at the disaster with tears streaming down her face. Elena, what's wrong? She shook her head, trying to wipe her eyes. I'm sorry. This is ridiculous. It's been so long since Jamie could just be a kid. Since he could make messes and not worry about cleaning them up perfectly because we might get kicked out. Since he could laugh without worrying about bothering the neighbors or drawing attention. Jamie had stopped laughing and was watching his mother with concern. Mom, are you okay? Elena knelt down and pulled him into a fierce hug. I'm more than okay, baby. I'm happy. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're happy too. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, some wall he'd built around his heart without realizing it. Looking at Elena and Jamie together, surrounded by the cheerful chaos of a successful science experiment, he knew with absolute certainty that he didn't want them to leave. Elena, he said carefully, can I talk to you for a minute? Privately. They stepped into the living room while Jamie continued cleaning up his volcano, humming to himself as he worked. I know you're saving up to get your own place, Marcus began, and I respect that. I know how important independence is, especially after everything you've been through. Elena nodded, her guard going up slightly. But I was wondering, Marcus continued, what if you didn't have to leave? What if this could be permanent? Elena's eyes widened. Marcus, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. Again. He ran his hand through his hair, searching for the right words. This house has felt like a home again these past few weeks. For the first time since Sarah died, I wake up with a purpose. I have people to take care of, people who take care of me in return. He gestured toward the kitchen, where Jamie was now singing a song about volcanoes he'd apparently made up on the spot. Jamie needs stability. He needs to stay in one school, make lasting friendships, have a place where he can build volcanoes without worrying about the consequences. And you need time to rebuild without the pressure of paying rent and utilities on top of everything else. What are you suggesting? Elena asked quietly. I'm suggesting we become a family, Marcus said, the words coming out in a rush. Not romantically, I know that's not what this is. But a chosen family. 3 people who take care of each other, who share the good times. And help each other through the bad ones. Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus began to worry he'd overstepped, pushed too hard. But when she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Are you sure? Really sure? Because Jamie's already attached to you, and if this doesn't work out. I'm sure, Marcus said without hesitation. Sarah used to say that families weren't just about blood or marriage. They were about showing up for each other, day after day, through whatever life throws at you. You and Jamie have been showing up for each other through impossible circumstances. I'd like to show up for both of you. Elena closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were bright with tears and something that looked like hope. Okay, she whispered. Yes, let's be a family. That night, they celebrated with homemade pizza and the remainder of Jamie's science project volcano, which erupted 3 more times before finally exhausting its supply of baking soda. Jamie fell asleep on the couch between Marcus and Elena, covered in flour and exhausted from excitement. I can't believe this is real, Elena said softly, stroking Jamie's hair as he slept. It's real, Marcus assured her. And it's just the beginning. As winter deepened, their unconventional family found its rhythm. Elena's nursing credentials came through, and she was promoted to a full-time position at the clinic. Jamie joined the school's science club and started bringing home new friends for study sessions and volcano experiments. Marcus found himself becoming the father figure he'd never thought he'd have the chance to be. They established traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon walks in the park, bedtime stories that rotated between Elena's gentle fairy tales and Marcus's dramatically told adventures of brave scientists and explorers. The house filled with laughter and homework in the comfortable chaos of people who belonged together. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Elena struggled with nightmares about their time on the streets, waking up in cold sweats convinced that everything good would be taken away again. Jamie went through a phase of hoarding food in his backpack, unable to trust that there would always be enough. Marcus battled his own demons, the guilt of moving forward with his life when Sarah couldn't, the fear that he was somehow betraying her memory by being happy again. They worked through it together, slowly and carefully. Elena started seeing a counselor at the community health center. Marcus began attending a grief support group that met at the local library. Jamie, with the adaptability of childhood, gradually learned to trust that this new stability wasn't going to disappear overnight. Spring arrived with a burst of cherry blossoms and daffodils, and Marcus found himself planning a garden with Jamie's enthusiastic help. They spent weekends at the nursery, selecting vegetables and flowers, Jamie insisting on including tomatoes because they're technically a fruit, you know, even though people think they're vegetables. You're going to be a scientist someday, Marcus told him as they planted their first row of seeds. Maybe, Jamie said thoughtfully. Or maybe a teacher like Mrs. Patterson. Or maybe someone who helps people like Mom does. Elena, who was planting marigolds nearby, looked up with a smile. You can be anything you want to be, sweetheart. You've got time to figure it out. That evening, as they sat on the back porch watching their newly planted garden and listening to Jamie read aloud from his latest library book, Marcus felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Elena's hand found his as they listened to Jamie's voice rise and fall with the rhythm of the story. Thank you, Elena said quietly. For what? For seeing us in that storm. For opening your door. For giving us more than just shelter, for giving us a home. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. Thank you for letting me. As summer approached, bringing with it the promise of Jamie's first full year at his new school and Alina's growing confidence in her position at the clinic, Marcus realized that the storm that had brought them together had been the best thing to happen to any of them in years. They were three people who had lost everything they thought mattered, only to discover that what mattered most was the willingness to open your heart to unexpected possibilities. They had learned that family wasn't something you were born into or married into. It was something you chose, day after day, through small acts of kindness and large gestures of love. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with laughter and homework discussions and the comfortable sounds of people who belonged together. Sarah's books were being read again, her recipes shared with new hands, her belief in the multiplication of kindness living on in ways she never could have imagined. And sometimes, on stormy nights when the rain hammered against the windows and the thunder shook the house, Marcus would look across the living room at Elena helping Jamie with his homework, or watch them reading together on the couch, and he would whisper a quiet thank you to the storm that had brought them home. Because that's what they were now, home to each other, anchor points in whatever storms the future might bring. They had learned that sometimes the most beautiful things grew from the deepest losses, that hope could be found in the most unlikely places, and that love had as many forms as there were people willing to open their hearts to it. The saddest storms, Marcus had come to understand, were often just the beginning of the most beautiful stories. And their story, the story of three hearts finding shelter in each other, was just beginning to unfold. 1 year later, as they celebrated the anniversary of that first stormy night with chocolate chip pancakes and Jamie's latest science project, a working model of the water cycle, Marcus hung a small plaque by the front door. It was a quote from Sarah's favorite poem, "After the storm, the sun emerges, and everything impossible becomes inevitable." Elena read it as she came home from work that evening, still wearing her scrubs and carrying Jamie's forgotten lunchbox. "I like it," she said, standing beside Marcus in their front yard. "She would have liked it too, wouldn't she?" "She would have loved it," Marcus agreed. "And she would have loved you both." That night, as the three of them sat around their kitchen table planning Jamie's upcoming birthday party and Alina's weekend plans to visit apartment complexes, a search that had grown increasingly half-hearted as the months passed, Marcus realized that some storms weren't meant to be weathered alone. Some storms were meant to bring people together, to tear down the walls that kept hearts separated, to remind everyone involved that the greatest shelter wasn't a roof or four walls, it was the decision to take care of each other, no matter what. And as thunder rumbled in the distance, promising another storm on the horizon, Marcus Chen smiled and reached for Alina's hand across the table. Whatever weather came next, they would face it together, as families do, with hope, with love, and with the unshakable knowledge that home isn't a place you find, but a feeling you create with the people who matter most. The storm had passed, but its gifts remained, three hearts that had learned to beat in harmony. Three souls who had discovered that the most beautiful shelters are built not from wood and stone, but from kindness, courage, and the radical decision to care for one another through whatever darkness the world might send. In the end, that was the greatest lesson the storm had taught them all. That love multiplies when shared, that families can be chosen as well as born, and that sometimes the most broken people are the ones best suited to help each other heal. Their story would continue, through seasons of sun and seasons of rain, through Jamie's growing up and Alina's growing stronger and Marcus's growing into the man Sarah had always believed he could be. But it had begun with a simple act, one person opening a door for two people who needed shelter, and discovering that in giving refuge, he had found his own way home. The storm had brought them together, but it was their choice to stay together that had transformed their individual struggles into a shared strength, their separate stories into one beautiful, complicated, perfectly imperfect family tale. And every time it stormed after that, they would gather in their living room, Marcus, Elena, and Jamie, and remember the night when everything changed, when the wind and rain had blown away their old lives and made space for something better than any of them had dared to.